All right there, welcome everybody, welcome. Looks like we're live. My name's Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artists Network, where we meet every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern to draw together. It's been a while. It feels like it's been forever. It's been a couple weeks since I've been actually able to draw with you live. So thank you all for coming back. I hope the recording that we posted last week was sufficient for you. That teapot was a bit of a challenge. And I thought I'd kind of keep things changing up a little bit. We're kind of getting into a rut with drawing using the same materials. So last week we did the tinted charcoal, and this week I thought I'd try working on this stuff. This is the Stonehenge, this Aqua Hotpress black. So this is a rag paper. Let me see if I make sure it's in focus there. It's a cotton rag paper, which, as many of you know, I really enjoy working with, but it's black. So it kind of forces us to think about values perhaps in a different way. I see some comments, some questions in the thread already about it. Feel free to use whatever materials you have on hand. So hopefully some of the things that we talk about in this process will translate whether you're working with traditional charcoal on white paper, toned paper, graphite, really any other medium. But I chose this week to, I don't know, shake things up a little bit and try working kind of in reverse in a way, working additively with the white. So starting with the black, building into some of those highlights. So this is the subject, this cool elephant. Elephants are awesome, and I'm really excited that I came across this image. And I don't, I guess I don't really know why I chose to pair this subject with these materials, but it just seemed like it was appropriate. So I want to welcome everybody. I love to hear where you're all viewing from. I see a lot of familiar names there. So I appreciate you all for joining us. If you are new, I'd love to hear where you're viewing from. Feel free to ask any questions, post comments, observations. This is all about drawing together, so I like to hear all of your virtual voices. So do your best to to participate as you feel so inclined. You also want to know that you can follow along with this image. You can find a link in the description below. You can also find a link to the page on artistnetwork.com where you can share your work when it's done. So in that description below, you'll find all the information, as well as I pinned a link to the page in the chat. So, all right, got to get in the game. I got let me go through the materials we're working with. Let's see. I'll start with actually the erasers. I'll leave this up here. So I'm actually, I really enjoy this accurate eraser that I got from Jerry's. So this is a mechanical eraser. So I'll bring that out perhaps. I just have a bunch ready. Sometimes I don't really know what I'll be grabbing until I actually grab it. I've got my kneaded eraser. I've got this rubber eraser as well as my retractable rubber eraser that I've been using. Again, I like to carve them down into these sharp points to give me a little bit more control and precision over some of the things that I'm erasing. Because as we know, one of the mantras here to the class is that you're always contributing to the form. So every tool you have, with this eraser, is charcoal, graphite, you'll always have an opportunity to contribute to the form. So that's why I have a variety of these erasers here. I have a blending stump. I'll see if I use that. I don't think I used it in this preparatory drawing. And then for the actual drawing, mark making materials, I have this, actually these Soho sketch squares. I've got the white here that I'll be working with. This is a Derwent black charcoal. It's like as soft as I can get and as dark as I can get. It's actually a little bit darker than the paper itself, which is really nice. And then I have a white charcoal pencil as well. So, but I find that these Soho sketch squares are really nice and vibrant. I'm going to put that out there early on, is that really there's no way for us to get as bright here as if we were working on the white paper. So the white paper is always going to be brighter than what we have here. There's always going to be some sort of translucency to the material that we're drawing with, so some of that black will show through. But I think that can be really helpful, because one of the things that I've encountered over the years is I have a bias towards some of the lighter values, and so working with a black paper like this can really shift my thinking in terms of that value range. So thinking in terms of a kind of deeper, richer value range than what I might have kind of a natural tendency towards. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. And so any other questions? I see some questions in all caps. That's really helpful because that helps me to identify questions that I can answer. So if you type them in all caps, I'm more likely to see them. If I skip over a question that you have, feel free to retype it. I like to get to all the questions, but sometimes I miss them in the chat. So Liz Miller's asking, can I use white chalk in place of charcoal? I think so. I don't see why not. And white pastel should also work as well. So, and if you are using it and it doesn't work, or it happens to work exceptionally well, let us know. I want to hear how that goes. Let's see. And I see some questions about other animals. Well, actually, hopefully in the coming weeks and months, I'm gonna try to do a whole section on working with animals. We have a pet portrait competition open at artistnetwork.com, and so I want to do some episodes that might help some of you that want to participate in that. Hello from Mexico City. I see a lot of new names here, so welcome. We got people from all over the world. Looks like we've got all over the U.S., Mexico City, Scotland. That's awesome. Fantastic. Welcome everybody. So let's get right to it. Kind of got to get my head in the game here. I found that it was really nice to be a little bit more expressive with the mark making in the preparatory drawing. So I think I might do that again today. Sunflower cherry flower 12, can you draw a line? That could be something that I definitely put on the list. So I will, if any of you have suggestions for subjects, feel free to throw them out there, or after this live session ends, it goes up as a recording, so feel free to post any comments or questions there, because I take a look at those as well. Or if you go to the page on artistnetwork.com for this episode, you can share some of your thoughts there. Mary C., greetings from Lakewood. I was down there yesterday. All right, I'm up here in northern Colorado. Let's see, I feel like this is shifted a little bit out of frame here. I'm just using my foot to kind of nudge things a little bit. That worked. I have this overhead arm that I just gently tapped, and it seemed to bring it into frame. So if anything happens technologically, hang in there. We'll see. I had to shake things up a little bit because my capture card, the last time we were drawing, it was giving me trouble, and I ended up replacing it today. It just wouldn't work. So I've got an entirely new capture device for my camera, and so I'm kind of testing things out. So what am I doing here? I am just using the weight of the sketch square here. I'm using the small thumbnail that's below me on the screen here, so it's really small. I don't want a large kind of high res image at this stage because I'm not ready for any of those details. I don't have a clear understanding of the form of this elephant, so I don't want my marks to reflect that. I want them to reflect the fact that I don't really know much about this thing right now. So that's what's so awesome about drawing, is that it is a way for us to kind of work through our process for observation. Now, we talk about that a lot in this topic a lot in the show, the idea of value versus line. And as you can see, I have some lines that indicate edges, but I'm going to do my best to try to see this as a set of just kind of abstract shapes. And if you just start to get marks on the page, it will help you to make specific declarations about these forms. So you'll be able to know precisely how things need to change as you get more information on the page. Again, that's something we bring up a lot, but I think it's important to reiterate, especially if you're new, is that we can sometimes feel like there's a certain amount of pressure to have a complete understanding of the subject very early on in the drawing process. But it takes time, and I think if you allow your drawing to evolve in the same way that your observations do and your understanding of the subject does, then you find that the drawing process is really one of exploration and development, kind of continual refinement rather than just a pure kind of execution of something that you already have understood, if that makes sense. So I'm just kind of giving myself some marks and trying to scan through the drawing to see it, try to see the forest for the trees as best as possible. Try to see it, the whole thing at once, and get a sense for where I might get tripped up later in the drawing, what areas might require a little bit more attention, where I can kind of lay back a little bit and not be quite as precise or controlled. And just start to gather a kind of an overview of the subject. So one of the things that strikes me now as I start to lay down these marks is the distinction between this being the light side, this being the shadow side. So within the light side, you see shadows. Within the shadow side, you see some bounce light, some subtle reflections in there. But if you can see that as a whole, it can sometimes help to structure the drawing to make sure that we have a really complete understanding of its whole form and not get bogged down into all the minutia and the detail in there. Because it's easy to, especially in the shadow side, to get sucked into all of that detail and then heighten that. And then when we do that, we lose kind of our control over the whole form. So I'm just kind of making that basic observation that as I start to refine this farther, this light here, it needs to be brighter than this. And I want to make sure that I don't overstate some of the reflected light in this side. So there's a lot of information that we can see, but it's all very subtle. And one of the best tools for that, to see that more clearly, is to squint. So you're reducing the amount of light that comes to your eyes. And when you do that and you look at your subject, certain things are going to fade away. And if something fades away, it suggests that the value relationship between it and its surroundings is actually closer together than it might appear when we're looking at it through sharp focus. So when we look at something through with a sharp focus, it tends to heighten that value contrast. And so if I'm focusing on this area here, I'm going to see that as being higher contrast than it actually is. So squinting becomes a really helpful tool of contextualizing your values and really understanding what is actually happening on that side. Now, the other key tool here, and I'm going to be using that a lot in the drawing, is the indirect gaze, which is something that we talk about here in the show quite a bit. The idea that you might be developing one portion of the drawing, but actually looking somewhere else. And so you can learn a lot about value relationships by looking in one spot, but putting your awareness on something else. So in the reference, if you look here at these values, but kind of shift your awareness to what's happening on the left side, you can see that there's a significant value difference. And then vice versa, looking here, but putting your awareness on this helps you to see that. If we just stay focused on that one side, like I said, there tends to be a distortion there. And so, and that can be, it's something that I see in some drawings when students have asked me in the past, well, what's wrong with this? How come it doesn't have that sense of form that I'm going for? Often it's related to that, is creating that clear distinction between light side and shadow side, and understanding the limits on the shadow side of how bright some of those areas need to be. So hopefully that makes sense. It feels very long-winded, and I'm sure I'll circle back to that topic. If that makes zero sense to you, or you have completely other questions, let me know, let the community know, because it's all about, again, us sharing our thoughts on drawings. Some of you may have very different ideas about what I just said, so feel free to throw that in the chat. If there's something about, some trick you might use to manage your value relationships that could be helpful for the group. And I don't want to take for granted that if you're watching that you have a certain understanding about even some of these terms, because it can be rather confusing. And if you're new to art making, it would be completely understandable if you're not familiar with the terms value or contrast or things like that. So if you do have any of those fundamental questions, let me know, and we can do our best to try to describe that for you. All right, so I'm just kind of going through, I've been thinking a lot about value, but letting my marks just kind of go. So I haven't put a lot of thought into proportions or anything. I just want to get a little bit more information down on the page so that I can start to correct it. If I were to break down my drawing process into basic stages, it starts with a gesture. Then you move into correcting proportions, and that's really the bulk of the drawing. In my mind, really the whole drawing process is about refining the gesture. So I kind of stick with it, and then eventually at the very end, it's about refining some of those details. So let's see, LL says, I never knew if it is correct to draw this way. High school art teacher insisted on graphing, on graphing, but freehand I feel better doing. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that issue with, thank you for making that comment, LL, because that topic has been on my mind a lot lately. That the idea of, these tools that we use as artists to develop our skills, and I think it's healthy to experiment and find what works for you. So if somebody likes to kind of grid or graph things a little bit, then that can be certainly helpful in some areas, and then you might also find that it doesn't serve you in others. So it's healthy to shake things up, try things out, see what works. But certainly not reject anything because you might consider it kind of cheating or whatnot. I think it's all fair game. There's no tool in the art world in which kind of inhibits you from applying any sort of artistic control. You never abdicate any responsibility as an artist based on the tool you're using. So go for it, see what works. We've talked about that before, using some of these apps or a camera Lucida or things like that I find can be very helpful in developing your skills if we approach it in certain ways. I think what I want to do is right now I'm just looking at the overall balance between light and dark. Does it feel like it's a pleasing arrangement of these light and dark forms? We can start to actually see the form emerging now. We've put very little work into it at this point, but we have a basic understanding of the subject already, and that can be kind of a powerful approach to the drawing process, where you're always just kind of refining the form, and you're in control of how far you refine it. So if you want to keep it loose and gestural like this, and not lose an expressive quality in the marks, then go for it. Or if you want to make it more kind of refined and capture all those fantastic details in the elephant here, then you can do that as well. Let's see, one question, Scott, what about when you're rubbing the shade of the paper? So you can see what I'm doing when I'm just kind of knocking this down. I had a paper towel that I dropped on the floor. And it was the last one in my roll here. So I don't really have a paper towel, but that can be more useful sometimes, is just use a paper towel to do it. I'm trying to avoid using my fingers as much as possible. You can see that I'm picking up some material on my fingertips, but these are kind of oily. And what I found is that it can, sometimes it can mess up the paper. Some of the oils in the fingers can then interact with the material. So I try not to use my oily fingers as much. So if I use a paper towel, that's probably the best. Without that, I just use the palm of my hand here. And what I'm doing is just softening some of those edges. And the way I think about it is that I'm unifying the marks. Every mark you make on the page creates a division. And what we're looking for as artists is that balance that feels right to us about how much division there needs to be and how much unity there needs to be. Because with greater unity, everything seems to make more sense. With greater division and greater contrast, it makes it more dynamic and exciting. And so depending on the subject and your approach, you wanted to push and pull those two to create the impact that you want with the viewer. And so the way I think about it when I'm wiping down is I'm just kind of unifying things. I'm softening it, and I'm bridging all those basic shapes together. And through this process, this image is going to gradually emerge. And I can be in control of which parts come together and draw the attention more, where I want to have more contrast, more division on the surface, and where I want to have things more unified. Is it for me? Is it about the mark making? Is it about capturing the kind of the structure of the elephant? Is it about something else? You know, and we're each going to have our own kind of take on the subject. All right, I think I need to now that this is coming together, I need to shift my thinking a little bit to proportions. I mentioned that, and then I haven't done it yet, so I got to get to it. All right, so what can be helpful when you're adjusting proportions is to establish kind of a base, kind of anchor point, and then start to adjust everything from there. All right, now I get a sense that pretty much everything's going to fit on the page properly. Now I need to start moving them around. It's the analogy that we've used in this series before of putting together a jigsaw puzzle, where you might be pouring out pieces on the surface, and then as you look at the information on each piece, you're moving them around until they lock together. So that's what's happening here with these marks. We've got these marks that are poured onto the paper, and as we gather information about the subject, we're going to move those marks around until it locks together the way we want it, until that image emerges. So it's really helpful, I think, to think about all of these marks as being fluid and flexible. But within that, you might set yourself a basic anchor. And I keep coming back to this area here. I think that's where in the reference photo, that contrast is pumped up a little bit. We see some really nice movement in the texture of the skin. And I get pulled right into this side. And so if I anchor that down, I can start to measure across and indicate things like the eye. I can establish an axis here. So if I mark the eye with an indication of the highlight there, in the shadow side, there's a slight reflected light catching the upper eyelid there. Now, so I've measured kind of that axis. What I haven't done is measured the distance. So now what I can do is I can compare the distance between the eyes to the distance between the eyes and the edge of the paper. So I have a larger reference here, and I'm going to actually just use my fingers here as a gauge. I can move them kind of back and forth, close one eye to flatten my depth perception. I'm going to take a measurement from here, from the edge of the image to the eye on the reference, and then compare that to the distance between the eyes, and then the distance from the edge on the right side to this eye. So what am I seeing? So if I take this measurement, and I'm looking at the reference, if I take this measurement and I come across, it should take me to just left of this eye, which is happening. And then I should be able to actually split that into thirds. So if here's one equal measurement across, I should be able to carry across to the other edge of the page. So that actually worked out. So we can basically divide it into thirds, so that we have 3 equal thirds across here, where this eye lands on the first third from the left. The second eye is just to the right of that third. And then, of course, we end here on the right. Now I can take that measurement and I can measure down from the top. So let me take that, let's see. And what I see is that if I take this measurement here from the top to the eye and I carry it across, it should put me just past this eye here on the right. Let me double check that. Actually, I might use my pencil as a gauge. So in this case, instead of using my fingers, I'm going to align this with the top of the reference photo. I'm going to slide my thumb down until it aligns with this eye. Hold my arm outstretched, close one eye, take that measurement, and then I'm turning it and comparing to the distance between the eyes. And actually, yeah, it should take me to that same point. So this distance here should be the same as this distance and here. So the distance here for this first third should be equivalent to where the eye is placed down from the top. So let me take that. So that might mean I move the eye up a little bit. This is where an eraser can be helpful, but you're always contributing to the form. So I want to think about that specific shape as I erase out that mark. Bring that up. And then this eye moves up here a little bit. And it's really important to take some time to measure things out like that, because there can be a disconnect between our initial impression of some of these proportions and what actually is happening. And that's just the tricks that our mind plays as we try to make sense of our subject. So when I look at the eye, I feel like it's more centered in the reference image. But after making those calculations and really making those observations, I realized that the eye is actually set up quite a bit higher in the image than my initial impression. And it can be helpful to always be double checking those things. All right. Now I think I need to bring this down just a little bit. There's should be a slight downward angle. So I'm kind of cleaning up these marks, but again, always contributing to the form. So as I'm erasing here and lifting off some of the light, I'm using that as a way to, at least in some way, indicate something about the structure of the elephant. All right, so now I think the other focal point here are those tusks. And so if I've placed this eye properly, I can drop a plumb line down and see where that tusk should orient itself relative to this eye here. And what I observe is that actually I have it starting too far over that way. So what I really enjoy so much about the drawing process is just the problem solving involved, and just trying to piece together the information. All right, so now that I've indicated this tusk, I can double check it with a few different tools. So again, I looked at dropping a plumb line here. So I'm looking at the relationship between this eye here and this tusk. But I can also kind of triangulate it a bit, so I can look at that angle. So do some angle sighting. I'm closing one eye. I'm aligning this with that angle I just targeted on the reference. And that looks about right. So I'm gathering the angle between the tusk and the left eye, and it seems to correlate with what I actually have on the page. Now, as artists, you also have control over how precise you would like to be with regards to these proportions, and so you may choose to exaggerate certain things, or maybe to be 100% faithful to the reference. But again, that's kind of up to you. I'm doing some angle sighting. What I'm looking for is that angle here on that, where the tusk emerges. And I need to do some angle sighting kind of connecting across here this tusk. And what I observe is that my initial statement there placed the tusk a little too high. I can do some subtractive drawing here with the eraser. All right. And then I can start to, from these kind of key points, start to measure out and develop some of these other areas. So what I'm doing as I'm making these statements is I'm looking at three different things. I'm looking at the reference image in front of me, that's the one that you're seeing right below me. I have on the right, I have that overhead projection, so I can see my work vertically and a little bit smaller. It's equivalent to stepping back, and I'm looking at it directly here. And with those three views, I'm able to create a more objective understanding of what's happening on the page. And it's really helpful, I think, for everybody to periodically tip your drawing up. If you're working more horizontally, I'm working at a slight angle here. If you're working like that, it's really helpful to be able to tip that up and see it vertically to make sure that you're not compensating for any sort of perspective distortion while you're working. Marty Lake, I tried black construction paper, not working well. Yeah, gray tone paper should work just fine. I'll actually be bringing some dark charcoal in, so you would just have to introduce that a little bit later, but I say go for it. Yeah, I kind of threw everybody off with this black paper here. It's been a long time. I've only done, I think, one other drawing in this whole series using black paper. But I'm really digging this, this Legion paper. This, again, what is it? I want to make sure I say it correctly. It's the Stonehenge, which we've worked actually in the white version of before, but it's the Aqua Hotpress black. So it's smooth but not slick, which is really handy. There's a difference between papers that are slick, in which the materials just slide off, and then smooth like this, where it has enough of a tooth to really hold the material, but it's not so textured that you're constantly battling it. All right, so now I'm intentionally darting around the drawing. This is kind of an interesting spot here. I'm kind of in a program I'm running in the back of my head is how I'm going to solve this area up here, because it's a very narrow value range, and I think I want to make something that's a bit more dynamic here. So I'm just kind of softening that a little bit. I may play around with that and change directions. So as you can see, what I'm trying to do is conceive of these edges as kind of shorter, straighter marks. So I'm using this block, but I'm just using this long corner here, and that creates nice fine lines. And one of the things I like about working with a stick like this is that it forces me to think about shapes and edges and refinements or details differently. I can't really get in there and get all these fine details early on. It kind of encourages a loosening up and an expression of these larger shapes first. But you'll see later on that actually we can get some, perhaps a greater range and details from a large block like this than we might think of otherwise. So some of the things I'm looking at here is there's an angle to the ear that is kind of interesting. So I'm looking at it, I'm trying to visualize what it would look like if I were to continue that angle down through the whole elephant, where it would emerge. And there's one on the other ear as well. So thinking kind of across the subject, forcing myself to do that because I'm starting to, I start to feel a little bit of kind of tension where I want to get in there and start getting some of these details, and I need to remind myself I'm not ready for that yet. The drawing is not ready for that yet. I haven't established enough of a structure. Now, one of the things that can be helpful if you're using a block, whether it's charcoal or it's a white drawing stick like this, is to be mindful of where pressure is being applied. So I generally start just by experimenting with the weight of the material itself to see what mark it kind of creates, and then as I need to, I can kind of lean in on it a bit more. The other thing I try to think about is where I'm applying the pressure in each mark that I'm making, whether I'm applying more pressure at the start and lifting off, or starting light and then ending with a heavy mark, or applying that pressure somewhere in the middle and kind of rocking that mark. So somewhere in here, for example, these are all really soft value shifts. And so I'm applying pressure more in the center of each stroke. So there's a landing, there's a lifting of these marks. Where I'm thinking here, it's almost the opposite. I can start to see some light catching along this ridge here on that ear, and I can lean in and then lift off. I see there's a distinct edge there that I keep coming back to. Right in here, again, there's another kind of harder edge, and I can kind of lean in and then flick off. I can start to get a sense for the way some of these creases in the trunk might wrap around. And what I observe now as I'm doing that is that there are really three distinct sections to each of those curves. There's a flatness across the front, and then it angles back. And because of the form and the way the trunk is shaped, there's a change in those angles. So in general, we're kind of horizontal here. As we come down here, we start to see marks that are still somewhat horizontal, but they start to kind of slope down. And then on the outer edges, again, we see kind of distinct curves that change, where it's a bit more shallow down here. As we work our way up, they start to become steeper. And so I'm not super precise with the placement. I'm thinking about it more gesturally and expressively, because I don't think I want to get bogged down in really the precise details of each of those curves. So Horsewoman 2000 in Longmont, I'm about 15 minutes from there, out in Mead. I was just in Longmont picking up a new capture card for the one that broke at the Best Buy there. Shout out to Best Buy for having the thing here for me. But I don't have in-person classes established. I used to teach at a community college down in Lakewood, but that ended a while ago. All right. What am I thinking? All right. I feel like things are emerging. What's standing out for me now is this tilt here, and that's because of this perspective distortion. When I'm viewing it from this angle, it feels more correct. When I look at it up vertically, I see that it's off. And so the way I'm going to correct that is I'm looking at the screen in front of me, which is what you're seeing. And I'm going to focus on the reference image, the small one off to the left, but I'm going to put my awareness on what's happening on the right. So I'm using my peripheral vision here. To kind of state that ear. Actually, I'm just going to soften that whole thing. I was going to erase that, but I actually don't want to. I want to lighten that whole area and then come back in. Where am I? there are these points to in the inner portions of these ears here that get tucked back. And for me, I feel like those are kind of focal points that I want to establish. So when I'm placing that mark, I'm doing some quick mental check-ins. I'm looking across the drawing, and I'm also looking down. So looking at horizontal guides as well as plumb lines. And just kind of doing a quick check-in to make sure I'm in the right spot. Looking over here, I lost sight of the placement of this little kind of hook to the ear. I started to shift over there a little bit, but I want to place it properly relative to the eye there and relative to this eye over here. So I might need to shift that a little bit. So much of this drawing process is about laying down marks, wiping it down, building it up, wiping it down, building it up. And the way I kind of think about that in my mind is that I almost think about myself doing 100 small drawings. And each one, you're kind of learning from the previous one, and you're kind of building on the ghosts of previous drawings, rather than it being one drawing entirely that I'm developing. Each time I wipe it down, it's almost like I'm taking the Etch-a-Sketch and I'm shaking it up and I'm starting over again. And each time I'm doing it, I'm a little bit more proficient. So, just pencil sketch. A few hours ago, I just posted the same sketch on my Instagram. All right. Jackie, yeah, the hat. That's the drawing I did on the black paper. So yeah, like I said, I kind of threw this at you all kind of last minute here, so I know many of you aren't prepared. I apologize. Well, I don't know if I really apologize. I do feel bad, but I feel like it's a great challenge and you're all up to it. So, so I do apologize, but not a whole lot. If I really messed you up. Hopefully, like I said, hopefully you accept the challenge, you take it, and you just roll with it, because like we say here in this show, this is one of hundreds of drawings. This isn't the only drawing we're ever going to do. And sometimes, you know, we got to shake things up. All right. Again, right now what I'm doing is I found myself getting absorbed in some of these finer details, shaking things up. I'm working on some areas in the periphery that might require a little less precision, and it's helpful in a drawing to have a place where you can kind of escape. It's true with painting as well, where just kind of keep things moving. You're developing the drawing, but you can relax the focus a little bit, because it can feel exhausting when we're thinking so heavily hard about the subject, and sometimes I just need to shake it off by making some marks. So what I'm doing now is I'm thinking really about the structure. It's starting to emerge. It's going to be a shift in your drawing where it goes from understanding it as an arrangement of two-dimensional shapes on a two-dimensional surface to then this three-dimensional object that's here, right? You understand it three-dimensionally, and you start to make marks on the page that really wrap around the form. And I feel like I'm not quite there in my drawing, but it's getting close, and I'm getting excited, because that's when the drawing gets really fun for me. It's like now there's a three-dimensional thing in front of me that I'm sculpting using these materials. So, all right. I'm glad you're taking the challenge, Monica and Mary there. So, welcome, Greg. Good to see you. You've been doing some strong work lately. All of you posted some of your drawings on the website, some really nice work, especially with the ocean one that we did recently. Some really nice, dynamic, and expressive drawings there. So kudos to you all for taking that challenge. All right. What am I doing? I feel like Right now I'm taking stock over the drawing, surveying it a little bit. I feel like what I want to do is change things up. I need to start paying closer attention to the direction of my marks. Again, that's something that we've talked about here in this show before, but that can sometimes be the key to making a drawing work, is simply changing the direction of the marks. And so in particular, do the marks reinforce the form? Does it create a visual separation between elements that are in different places in space, or does it flatten it out? And what can be tricky is that there's a natural movement in our arms, in our hands. And I'm right-handed, so I'm going to have a natural bias to making marks that run this way. It's more challenging to run this way. And if I don't pay attention to that, if I'm not mindful of that, I can fall into this habit of creating these marks, and makes everything feel like it's leaning in one direction. And so I intentionally need to shake things up. So for example, over here, I might run these marks intentionally this way to contrast the angle here, that edge that's moving me out of the drawing here. And in that way, I can start to create some visual separation. And then just on a pure abstract way, those marks are bringing me into the drawing, right? So there can be a benefit to be thinking abstractly about this. So I've been thinking a lot about creating more abstraction in my work. And sometimes we think about drawing kind of realistically as being somehow different from abstraction, fundamentally different. And I feel like if we take some time to think about where they overlap, it can be really beneficial to the two of them, rather than thinking of them as being diametrically opposed. Okay, what am I doing? All right, one of the things that I'm observing as well is, of course, I have the benefit of having done this drawing now twice. This is my second attempt at this drawing. In looking back at my previous attempt, one of the things that I didn't really pay much attention to was the contrast vertically here. And what I see now is that I really intensified this area too much. And looking at the reference photo, you can see a shift in value from dark, and then we hit the highlights here, and then it starts to soften a little bit, and that creates that curve that now when I look at this first attempt, is really just too flat. And so now I have an attempt to kind of pull that out, and hopefully it's something that you all can benefit from my mistakes. And I kind of like this soft, ghostly light that is emerging in this drawing. And I think I want to emphasize that a little bit more, be a little less hard-edged compared to my initial attempt. Okay. I think I do want to sculpt the things a little bit more. I'm going to now, one of the opportunities when working with white material on black surface is that it inverts our natural association with additive and subtractive drawing. So in this way, my subtractive process is actually creating dark marks, and it's kind of hurting my brain a little bit. So the way I start to think about that then is that I kind of forget that I'm working with an eraser at this stage. I try to imagine I'm actually working with charcoal. In that way, I'm contributing to the form, and I'm thinking about this subtractive process as being additive. So there are some kind of mental tricks that I'm playing with myself, and it can be helpful, I think, sometimes to do that. And when I'm making these marks, one of the advantages to working with the Kneaded eraser is that it's a little bit softer, and I can kind of sneak up on some of the values a little bit more than if I were to use the rubber eraser at this stage. And so I'm just using the weight of the material, and I'm trying to think really about sculpting the form. And if I'm really light, like right in here, I'm not lifting any material, I'm actually blending. And in that way, it helps me to sneak up on the form, be a little bit more tentative, and now piecing together the form through the areas of dark versus the areas of light that I have been doing. Ooh, Michelle, it's a good question. How are you not getting absorbed in the wrinkles? It helps. I'll tell you the truth here. The thing that's helping me the most is the fact that I have to talk about it to you all because it's keeping me honest. I said I wasn't going to do it, and now I have to hold myself to that commitment. If I didn't have you all to worry about, I don't think I would be as successful. So sometimes it can be helpful to maybe say it out loud and say, you know, I'm committing myself to withholding the gratification of those wrinkles there. So it's a good question. I've talked to myself out loud when it's just me, and that can sometimes be helpful. It's just to articulate verbally, I'm working on this area now. I'm doing that because of this. And in organizing my thoughts in that way, because it can really be easy to jump from one point of interest to another and lose control over the whole process. And the next thing you know, you don't really know why you're doing what you're doing, not why you're making those marks or making these decisions, because we can sometimes just get absorbed in the whole process, just the love of the mark making or something in the subject, and we lose sight of the entire process. So in this way, I've got this white material, the Soho sketch squares, those guys right there. I got those, and I've got my kneaded eraser, and I'm working back and forth. Keeping in mind all the while, you know, kind of doing these check-ins across the drawing. I do that like I'm physically tapping over here to keep that fresh in my mind where I am. It helps me to keep organized. Sometimes I'll point, I'll use my left hand here, and I'll point at the section that I'm working with or I need to check. And it looks a little weird, but it helps me to organize my thoughts so that I don't get lost in the drawing. So as I'm working down this side, for example, it's really easy to get absorbed in just that contour. So I need to kind of check in across the drawing. And to Michelle's question there, like, again, talking to you about it out loud helps me to do it, because I don't always adhere to that. I succumb to the same issues I think you all do. What's nice about this eraser is that it's a little bit gentle, so I can make these little statements across the surface of the drawing without really influencing it too much. So right now I'm observing, for example, that shadow that this tusk is casting on the trunk. Looking at that negative space in there. And so one of the things that might also be helpful is to think that, you know, when I started this drawing, I'm making large statements. I'm looking at the larger forms, right? And I'm gradually getting smaller and smaller. But the decisions I make about those forms are consistent throughout the whole process. We're just changing from thinking about them in a large way to a small way. So where I started to think about that form as a series of abstract shapes, when I start to refine that, I'm still thinking about abstract shapes, but I'm just thinking them on a more granular level. So that can be sometimes helpful to kind of keep that in mind, that, you know, again, not get absorbed in the literal understanding of the form, and keep that abstraction going, right? So and then trust that if you get those abstract shapes placed properly, that they will piece together to create this illusion, this understanding of the elephant. The other thing that now occurs to me as I'm mark making with the eraser here is to be thinking about the positive and negative space. So the distance between the tusk here and then that background. I'm going to soften this a little bit. And then erase again. I kind of like that light right there though. And don't be afraid to leave marks that just feel good, right? And you know, that's what happened there. There's something happening in here that I'm responding to that makes me feel good, so I'm going to leave it, even though it doesn't look like what I'm seeing there. And I'm going to do that because I don't really know what that's going to teach me about mark making. There may be something in another subject that that this will be useful for. But I just, like I said, when I was thinking about this preparatory drawing, I think I was getting absorbed in some of those details, like you're talking about, Michelle. And I don't know as if I open myself up to some more of these atmospheric effects that I see happening right now. So I'm going to go with the atmosphere on this drawing a little bit. That's what I seem to be responding to. And I'm going to trust that. But you, again, maybe your drawing may be giving you something else. And that may be, if you've heard other artists talk about that in their process before, the idea of responding to what the painting or the drawing wants, that in my mind is what's happening right here. I kind of created this soft edge here with the intention of creating some separation between the tusk and that background. And as in that process, it created these marks that I didn't really anticipate in advance. But now I'm responding to that. And in that way, the work itself is giving me some sort of guidance into what needs to happen. And so that's when I hear an artist talk like that, when I'm watching them work and they're saying, now I'm responding to what the painting is doing, or that in my mind, that's what's happening, is that an intention may have been set that then gets disrupted based on what is actually playing out on the surface. And you're allowing those happy accidents to play a role in the work. And in that way, as an artist, you're shifting your role from controlling the material to controlling the experience based on what the materials are doing. Let's see. Liz is saying, yeah, you're so right. When I'm painting, I get into the details too quickly. I have to stop, walk away, and return with a different perspective. I'm glad you shared that. I imagine that's something that many of you who are watching experience as well. I know that's definitely something that I have to contend with. So as I'm doing this, I'm thinking of two things at once. I'm thinking about the shape two-dimensionally, and I'm thinking about the form three-dimensionally. And one of the tools I'm using to do that is I'm letting my eyes stay unfocused. Throughout this whole process, I'm letting my eyes just be softly focused. Squinting is a way to arrive at that, but I prefer to simply relax my eyes. And when I do that, it helps me to see some of these forms as two-dimensional abstract shapes. And then as I'm making those marks, if I'm thinking about that two-dimensional shape, I'm trying to think about it using marks that run along the cross contour of the form. So I'm thinking about the angle of the form, and so as I'm looking at this eye shape, for example, we're kind of looking across a flat surface, and I'm lifting this mark up. That's what I'm trying to do, if that makes sense. And again, that's that part in the process where the three-dimensional form seems to take over, and you see it as more of a sculptural element on the page. Hello, Tammy. I'm glad you were able to join us live. I know you were struggling with that the last time, but I'm glad you're able to make it. And Gail, I'm glad that those comments resonated with you about just kind of letting things go sometimes. But as I always say, you know, again, you are in control of the experience that you want as an artist. So just kind of embrace that. You know, there are days when I want the experience of control and kind of precision and fine details, and then there are some days where I want the experience of expressive mark making, and I'm feeling more expressive today than perhaps some other days. There's something that feels off here. So let me kind of wipe that down and I'm going to restate that. I'm just going to tackle it again. Don't be afraid to just totally wipe out a section and rebuild it in your drawing. Right here, I'm losing sight of that eye. This has been pulled over too far. So do some negative drawing here. I'm going to drop that sky in. And I kind of like the way that that's breaking up the value relationships between light and dark. I'm going to feather this out a little bit too. So I like that transition into the dark there, because then what that will allow me to do is let me see if I soften this, and then I come back in with kind of a harder light here. And it creates that interplay, the interlocking of light and dark value relationships. I might come back to that a little bit more. So started to get a little sucked into that one area. Need to shake things up a little bit, move around the drawing. And don't be afraid to let edges disappear if you're so inclined. Those lost and found edges can be really dynamic and dramatic. So I worked very hard edged for a long time, and I had some artist friends that I'd be working with that would try to encourage me to soften things a little bit, and I don't know why I resisted it for so long. It was just something in my nature that felt like I needed to have sharply defined edges, and I'm glad I kind of stuck with it for a while. But now I'm at that place where some of these artist friends were long ago, where I'm starting to appreciate the power of just soft edges. So all right, Tammy, I'm glad you're able to join us and dig in. And again, if you're wondering, this all goes up as a recording. So if you've missed some part of it and you want to just kind of sit back and watch, come back to the drawing later, go ahead and do that. All right, what am I doing now? Okay. Got to start making some decisions. All right. right, and here's what I think what I want to do is I think I can start to bring some focus in. I'm going to bring out the white charcoal pencil. Now this is a little bit harder than the Soho sketch square, so this isn't going to get quite as bright. I can lay it down, but it's also scraping the surface a little bit. And actually it can be really useful because I can use that to kind of refine some of these areas here. So I'm going to be thinking now in terms of refinement. I've got these large soft edges. What are some places in this image where I can sharpen things up a little bit? And again, I think I kind of like what's happening here. If I get rid of this, if I cover over this, I kind of like just the sheer mark making on those edges. There's a lot of energy there that I want to let sit. There's something compelling in that says, don't work on this anymore, right? So I guess that's where the intuition comes in. And if you get to that point where if you're not quite sure what your intuition is telling you, that's fine too. You know, just keep making marks is my suggestion. All right, what I think I want to capture that I didn't quite get right in my preparatory drawing is this structure across the forehead that tells us so much information about this unique subject. And you know, we can see using the visual information provided us in this reference image, we can get a sense for the structure underneath it, where it might be a little bit harder, where that bone might be closer to the surface, and where there might be more kind of flesh and fat and things like that under the surface that soften things. And I want this drawing to in some way reflect that. And I think if I bring in some contrast, if I focus more on that in here and allow this to be soft and atmospheric, that contrast might be really kind of interesting. So that's just where my head's at right now. And I'm saying that out loud because in 5 minutes I could completely change direction and have this drawing be about something entirely different. And then I end up with just a scattered drawing that doesn't really have the focus that can be useful. I find myself bouncing around throughout the drawing process. I get excited by all these different things. And then in the end, I just realized all I did was just keep changing directions. And sometimes it can be helpful to just stick in a direction. And I put these mental notes in my brain that if I say, for example, I start to get excited about all the fine details, I can say that's going to be for the next drawing. You know, I started this, I'm getting excited about some of these atmospheric and these expressive marks, so I'm just going to go with that and tell myself that where I get an impulse to get into those fine details, that's awesome. I just may need to save that for the next drawing. All right, so I'm just gonna, what's gonna drive this is my selection where I'm gonna bring in those details. So I'm gonna focus in on this eye, give it a little bit more information. And what I wanna observe is really the way it seems to wrap around here. And you can see it clearly with the way the light is reflecting off of those creases right in here. I think I need to smooth things out. And what happens if I grab this? I haven't used the blending stump this whole time. And this is really weird because it's picking up some of the material and it's actually darkening it. Space Galleria. I'm glad it looks great from space. That's awesome. How's everybody else's drawing coming along? If you're following along, how do you feel about it? I think I'm going to focus a little bit, so maybe a little less talking. I'm using this blending stump similar to how I was using the kneaded eraser, which is to kind of sneak up on some forms and kind kind of pre-visualize what needs to happen. So I'm trying to think through the structure. How do these forms really kind of wrap around and interact with one another? I think what is distinctive here is that sharp contrast between these marks that wrap underneath here and then this sharp edge that catches the light right in here. So that overlapping of the form could be really interesting. So I'm just kind of mapping things out a little bit in my mind, and I don't really have the time or the inclination to really make sure I get all of those creases 100% aligned with the reference photo. So I want to make sure I just get the overall kind of gesture of that area. Thinking through this area, one thing that could be helpful is to understand that as we wrap around from the front part here, the brow essentially, it starts to really wrap around so that by the time we end up here, we're almost looking directly across the surface. So I want to change up those marks accordingly. So think about kind of more open marks here and just getting tighter and tighter and tighter as we wrap around up there. All right, Michelle, thanks for watching. Enjoy your horseback riding. Yeah, and Tammy has a observation about the light. Yeah, this is definitely quite strong here, so I can knock that down a little bit. And that's part of what's happening here with the blending stump. There, I want to start to, it's actually lifting material and darkening, because I think one of the things that's going to be helpful in capturing the structure here is to pay attention to where the lightest lights are going to be on each of those little bumps in the texture. So as Tammy observed, yeah, like some of these areas look a little bit too bright right now. I don't have the ability to go brighter, so I think what I want to do is actually knock everything down just a little bit, knowing that I can drop in brighter highlights a little bit later. Now with this blending stump, actually maybe I'll switch to this one this has been well used and it's got some charcoal built up on it. I'm going to try to indicate some of these darker creases. So it's both laying down some of the charcoal that's on there, and it's lifting some of the light to show some of that dark paper through it. One of the things that might be helpful is to try to think of how things felt when you first started drawing or painting, and you're just trying to discover how these materials work. And I try to keep that mindset as much as possible while I'm working, that be open to discovering new ways of working with the materials. And that's one of the things with the blending stump that has been helpful, is just kind of push it around the page a little bit, see how it interacts with the materials, and then what it might be able to provide you in terms of a range of marks. So I'm starting to think through, there's essentially a grid, there's a mesh in all those creases, and you get some lines that kind of run this way and then run contrast in that contrasting direction this way. So I'm starting to take a look at some of those. Really try to emphasize that vertical nature of that forehead, and it dips down, and it kind of just scoops in here. So that's, I'm trying to just verbalize what's happening in my head a little bit when I'm thinking about the structure. It can be helpful, you know, if I were a biologist and I studied elephants and I knew exactly what's happening under the structure, that could be useful. But it doesn't necessarily have to inhibit you if you don't have that level of anatomical understanding. If you just think through it kind of abstractly, like what are the angles, the directions, is it soft, is it a hard edge, is it a sharp reflection or a subtle one, all of those things, then you know, from those kind of artistic decisions you make, help you to understand the subject a little bit better. I think what I want to do actually is I want to lay down some material here so I just have some value. And then I'll use my eraser to draw a little bit. And I find it, yeah, it's really starting to challenge my brain a little bit, thinking both additively and subtractively. All right, I need to get back. I've kind of forgot the placement of the eye here. And then when I just erased that darker mark, it kind of threw me off a little bit because my brain says, oh, that's the eye. But it's not. It's a dark spot above the eye. The eye is actually down here. Again, I got to say that out loud. Helps me stay focused. Susan is asking, how can I be on a reminder for these sessions here, this drawing together? If you want to watch more, so you can go to artistnetwork.com. There's a drawing together page under video. So if you find, actually, if you, there's a link that I pinned to the top of the chat. That'll take you to the show page for this. And then once you're in there, you can kind of see that, you know, the other episodes. So there's a landing page for all the drawing together episodes. We're on, what, 109, something like that. We've done more than 100. And so I update those regularly, so hopefully we'll get next week's posted soon after this. And then also just right on YouTube, if you subscribe to our channel and you hit there's a little notification bell there that'll alert you when I set up the next session or when the next one's going to be live. So but we meet every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. I do that as best I can. Last week I couldn't meet live, so I pre-recorded a session and that was aired as a premiere. So for those of you who showed up expecting a live session, and you got the recording. Yeah, I've got other duties here at Artist Network, and we just couldn't move those around to accommodate this schedule. But generally, I keep my Wednesdays open for drawing live with you all. Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of want to just leave those as they are for now. I found myself working down towards the tusk, and I think I'm just going to leave that. So again, actually, what I'm going to do is switch now to my rubber eraser, this retractable one. Again, I have it. I took a razor blade and I carved this down to a sharp point, and that allows me to work with the corner and the kind of the chisel edge. So if you don't want to get bogged down in each and every kind of crease and bump, and you just want to kind of suggest them, kind of like what I'm doing now, the criteria that I'm looking at is, you know, what is the angle, what is the direction of the mark, and how close together are they? So with this three-dimensional form, when I'm looking at the center of the form, I'm looking at it more directly, those marks become more horizontal and vertical, and they become wider spaced. And as we wrap around the sides on both directions, because we're looking across that surface, those marks tend to kind of squish together a little bit. They get closer together, and then those angles change. So as we look up here, for example, you know, we can really start to see those angles and the way they curve. And that this sharp kind of chisel point allows me to create these nice fine lines. And I'm trying not to draw them as one go, breaking it up. So almost think about it like constellations, like connect the dots where you're making a mark and then you're skipping down the form and dropping it down there. The eye will more readily accept that as texture when you do that. What can sometimes happen with a hard drawn line is that we interpret it as the edge of an object, not a texture on the surface. So when I'm making these marks, I'm transitioning between using that edge to create these fine lines. Again, thinking about the angles, the spacing between them, and then kind of rolling in on that corner to change up those marks. You want to break up those marks. If you're going for kind of a sense of realism, it can be helpful to try to think about breaking up those marks. And so it's there's kind of a rhythm to the mark making and the observations where it's kind of making a mark, stepping back, evaluating, observing, making the mark, you know, stepping back, evaluating, observing. And it may feel a little clumsy at first. If you're new to drawing, that's a lot for the brain to make sense of. There's so many decisions that we make as artists, and so hopefully you're being kind to yourself and just taking a nice, slow, steady approach, and recognize that it will all get easier and more fluid as you work. One of the things that I think could be most helpful when you're trying to develop your drawing skills is gesture drawing, in that, you know, for one of the things that can often be challenging for us is to contribute a certain amount of time to our artistic practice. And if you're limited in terms of time, it's more beneficial to do 100 quick drawings than one long drawing, if that makes sense. Because so much of the time that we contribute to a more involved drawing is in these kind of finer details that really don't advance your hand-eye coordination or your skills of observation as much as, you know, these quick gestures. That's really going to build your hand-eye coordination, and you have to think through a lot of big decisions, big important decisions very quickly. So we can sometimes underestimate the value of gesture drawing because we in favor of those kind of more refined and bigger detailed drawings, if that makes sense. And I kind of say that out of experience because I did that. You know, I would spend so much time working on these big elaborate drawings, and then I remember one assignment, instead of doing one 2-week assignment, I took those 2 weeks and I filled 2 sketchbooks with gesture drawing. And I realized that I learned so much more about drawing that way than I did the previous assignment, which took me hours and hours, but it was one drawing. And of course, I think it can be helpful to balance, jump back and forth, do some big projects where you really feel like you're out of your comfort zone and they require a lot of time. So you learn a lot from doing those as well. But it can sometimes be helpful to remind ourselves of how much power there can be in these quick drawings, these quick gestures. All right, so yeah, again, just using my eraser to draw with. The three things that I'm thinking about when I'm making these marks is, again, the angle and the placement of them, and then I'm rolling my wrist so I can kind of be a bit more gentle and kind of glide across the surface, then roll my wrist, lean in, and give myself a sharp edge. And I want to vary those marks as much as possible. And then stepping back, evaluating the effect in the drawing to see if anything kind of stands out. Do I need to change direction, or is it leading in the way I want to go? But I found for myself that I end up creating more convincing textures when I think about it gesturally, more abstractly than versus really a high degree of control. So pressure is a big thing on whether you're working with charcoal or the eraser or what. So, you know, see what happens when you just use the weight of the material. What happens when you really bear down. And you can just about fix anything. And if you can't, like if you've made a mark and it's just not lifting off the surface or whatnot, then I think my inclination is to just continue to work with that drawing. You might say, hey, this is gone. Now that it's shifted from being kind of a convincing drawing of an elephant, and this has now just become a practice section. This is, you know, I've sometimes done that with paintings. I might have one painting that is my goal, my intention, and then another where I just experiment. And I might be kind of working on there and just kind of letting stuff happen on that other surface, and then bringing some of that education into the one that I'm really kind of focused on. And with a drawing that doesn't necessarily go the way it's intended, you just kind of turn it into that experimental surface and see what happens. And that way you kind of reclaim your experience a little bit. Okay, kind of just kind of darting around, because what can happen, it's kind of intentional. You can see I'm working on the trunk and then moving away, coming back, working on it a bit more, moving away, because I have a tendency to create these rhythmic marks. And especially something like this, I run the risk of doing something like this, just kind of creating stripes across the surface that aren't really descriptive of what I'm observing. That's not what I'm actually seeing. I'm seeing this beautiful abstract rhythm to the folds and the creases. There's an underlying structure, and there's a sense of rhythm, but it's in the shifts in that rhythm that it really comes to life. So that's why I'm jumping around from one spot to the other. Just pushing and pulling. So I'm scraping across and then digging back. Change up the marks. All right. All right, Greg, thanks for those comments there. I do remember when it's 3 days a week. Whew, that was a lot, but so much fun. I could seriously do this every day. And I appreciate you all, many of you that have been with us since the very beginning. need to do now? I think I kind of like what's happened here is that edge is broken and it creates this almost like a sense of burst of light there. But it's a little less finished than I want it to be, so I'm just going to sharpen it up in some areas. Here on the underside it rolls into that shadow, so I can soften that edge. I think I just want to smooth that out and then come back in with this highlight. A little bit, give that a little bit more form. And I think right in here I want to do the same. I'm going to sharpen up this edge. So when you're dealing with these tusks, one of the things that I'm battling right now in my mind is I have this thought about the tusk as being like this scoop, right? And that's influencing the marks that I'm making. And so I'm trying to really override that and look at it as an abstract shape. Because it's coming towards us, because it's a foreshortened element, I understand like that scooping motion, but I have a tendency to want to kind of pull it off to the side and draw these big, almost like mustaches. And so one of the ways that I can kind of override that is to look at that negative space. So kind of shift from thinking about the tusk to the shape of the space around it. And in that way, I'm not drawing a tusk. I'm not being kind of driven by that preconceived notion, that symbol system that I think we all confront when we're working. That negative space can be quite a powerful tool. And then in this way, yeah, this white chalk is the Soho sketch squares are really nice because it gives me that nice bright light. And I think this, where is that? There is that light catching that side of the ear. But it's a little bit too strong. Let me soften that and then sharpen that edge a little bit. Okay, so focusing a little bit more, so I'm talking less, just trying to react to now what's happening on the drawing to see what the drawing itself needs. Is it suggesting the texture properly? Is it suggesting the form? Where might I find an opportunity to contribute to the form even more? And it's really helpful because when I look at it up close here, I'm only 8 inches away from the surface, a foot away from the surface. I see some of these marks are actually a little clumsy. But when I look at it on the screen and it's a smaller scale, it starts to fit together a little bit better. And that can be the power of stepping back from your work. In general, I prefer my work to function properly, to read better at a distance than up close. But you may have that different objective. You may be of the mindset of the work really being kind of pulling the viewer in and looking at it up close. It kind of goes back to the experience that you are excited by and what you're trying to create. And there are some really amazing drawings that when you look at it up close are just stunning. You just get absorbed into these subtle marks. And then at a distance it may fall apart some, but that's where, then maybe it's about looking up close. Kind of like Mark Rothko I had heard was kind of very precise about the distance from which you would observe his paintings, saying that there's an optimal distance. And All right, so I think, yeah, I'm happier with the variety of this than in my previous attempt. I want to soften some of these marks. So I'm looking at some of the texture, and where the tooth of the paper was showing more was distracting a little bit. So as the texture is starting to form here, I want to bring more into there, and then the tooth of the paper showing here becomes a little bit stronger, and it kind of it distracts a little bit. So I'm going to soften that. All right, so Liz, the chalk work, that's awesome. All right, thank you for the comments there. Again, if you have any questions, I like to make sure that I'm articulating myself effectively. So if I ever say anything that just makes zero sense, because there's a lot of things that are formulating in one way in my brain and they come out completely differently. So, and I realized, oh, I didn't say the thing that was on my mind. I just thought it. So as I'm going through this, again, the focal point starts to become these eyes for me. I lifted out some of the creases using the eraser. I softened the light in general to create an average value, but now I can come back in with a little bit more intense light and kind of capture the light that's catching on some of the high spots in the texture there. And I've got this big kind of chunk of sketch square, but if you just use the corner of it, let it kind of rock in your hands a little bit, break up those edges, you can suggest a fine amount of detail. So I'm trying to think about varying my marks from dragging up along the cross contour. So there's really two dimensions that are critical here. There's that one dimension that runs this way along the cross contour, and then there's those vertical ones and how it changes there. It seems to have like this almost hourglass shape in a way when you look at the vertical dimension. And I'm just gonna kind of skip across the surface to avoid making hard lines. Oh, I like the light that catches right in there. This is starting to become a bit more dramatic than the reference photo, but I like it. It's where photos are really references. You can let the drawing take over from there. So again, just kind of darting, moving around, even though I'm in the stage of the drawing where I'm refining it and really focusing on some of these finer details. I'm still trying to move throughout the whole drawing, and now as I do that, I want to be mindful of how the intensity of these marks transfers across the surface. So I'm going to start with kind of just softer marks so that they're not too bright. I want to maintain that value hierarchy of it being brighter here. And then there's a few areas where the light seems to catch on some of the texture. So I'm just kind of skipping across the surface, and it seems like from a distance that it's working out okay, so just going to keep going. And observe like these kind of bands of light, and they're not just kind of vertical stripes the way I want to draw them. There's an irregularity to them. This has certainly been a lot of fun just for the sheer mark making of it. And I think one of the things that, as I reflect on my earlier experience with the preparatory drawing, I think one of the things that that stands out is the fact that I spent more time looking at the large reference image from my preparatory drawing. I've hardly gone to the large one here that's on my left. I find that I'm actually enjoying working from the smaller reference on the screen in front of me more than what I did before, and so that might be helpful. And here it starts to, it's kind of a softer gradation there. And then right now I feel like the form is starting to emerge here, and I want to be selective on where I bring in a greater degree of refinement. Right now there seems to be a jump from this area here to that, and so I need to create a bit of a transition where I'll apply some degree of refinement, but maybe not as much as in here, and then in that way hopefully transition to some of these outer, more kind of atmospheric areas. Bring in a little bit more light here. Just thinking about balance a little bit. So where this ear is being defined by this positive space, that mark here along that edge, and the light against a slightly darker background, I'm going to reverse that over here, and I want to kind of brighten up that background here, running it vertically so those marks don't get confused for marks on the elephant. So by changing the direction of the marks, it's a visual indicator that it doesn't belong to the form of the elephant. They're separate from one another, creating visual separation there. All right. Awesome, Brenda. Thank you, Eva, for the comments. Welcome, everybody. If you're new, what you're watching is Drawing Together. My name's Scott Maier with Artist Network. We meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, to draw together because it can be helpful as artists to develop our skills. So what we try to do is a new subject each week where we select the subject to develop skills in a particular way. Here's what I want to do. I want to bring more form into this eye. So we kind of have that sense of scooping along back here, but it gets a little bit more ambiguous here. I really want to create that form down there. There's this really just richness to the structure here. And there's so much going on in there that I'm just going to try to feel it out a little bit. Sometimes it doesn't take much, but just giving even just a little bit of attention and some abstract mark making can be enough to pull it together. Here, now I'm going to switch to this. And this black, actually. I'm going to drop in a little bit of light here. I feel like that's a little bit too dark in here. And now I can refine the shape of the eye using the black charcoal. looking at the shape of the light and shadow. I'm trying not to think of this as an eye. I'm trying to think of this as just abstract shapes. And again, trust that if I get those abstract shapes in relatively the right place, that it'll all accumulate together. It'll look like this eye. So just like with the other materials, starting with just testing out the weight of the material itself, and then applying more pressure. If I feel like, all right, I'm in the right spot, I think I know the mark that I want, it needs to be stronger, etc. And so what I'm intentionally trying to do is I'm trying to create, again, that visual separation between what's happening here, which is a little bit farther back, and that front edge, which is forward, because that's what's going to convey the form. Now, one thing I could do is draw a line here that would pop that forward. But the first thing I'm going to do is look at the change in the direction of the marks and see what that does. So I'm kind of visualizing where that edge is, placing the charcoal right along that edge, and then flicking up and away. See how that works, and then I think I can sharpen up in a few select areas. Got a little ahead of myself there. So now I'm just bringing in a little bit more depth to some of those dark kind of creases that I had lifted using the eraser. So as I get into these creases, again, I want to be careful not to draw kind of distinct lines. So what I find is more helpful for me is to use the side of the pencil. So I switch to this overhand grip that allows me to kind of rotate my hand a bit, thinking about the cross contour, the way those creases flow over the form, and where those dark marks are. I'm just kind of tapping along that form, starting with the weight of the pencil, see what it does. And if I'm pretty happy with it and I need it to be darker, then I can go back in and lean in on it a little bit more. But there's something about using the side of that pencil, and when you drop in a line, it feels more like a thin shadow than a contour line or the edge of an object. And that's really critical when creating that illusion of texture. Just kind of sharpen up this part of the tusk. And I'm really trying to use the side of that pencil more. If I need a fine line, I can lean in on that point of the pencil, but now again, there's texture, there are kind of details that are emerging in this drawing in slightly different places and in slightly different ways from the original reference photo. So as I start to see like highlights and a shadow form that create one of those creases in the trunk, rather than really try to force it to look exactly like the reference photo, I'm going to go with what I have here and maybe add a little bit of depth to some of those creases to really make it feel more rounded. And in this way, letting the drawing take the lead to some degree. You know, we're still trying to capture the quality and the experience of understanding this elephant, but you know, again, you're as an artist, you're going to be in control of how closely this should match the reference. You know, is it going to be more of an expressionistic understanding, kind of capturing the overall essence of it, or do you need to kind of fight it and make sure that it stays truly adhering to the reference? Right in here, I'm seeing that as I start to drop in some of those marks, it helps to create a bit more form in that shadow, and I realize now that how much that was lacking. So I can lean in on that a little bit more. So as I work on some of these longer creases around that come over the trunk there, rather than one smooth curve, I'm trying to break it up in a sequence of these lost and found edges. And as I drag along the length of the pencil here, I'm rolling it to continually engage kind of a sharper edge. Some negative drawing in here to create that trunk. I think that'll help bring it forward if I suggest the light on the edge of that trunk, just kind of sharpening up that edge. Here we go. I like that. All right. But I like how that becomes atmospheric. So sharpening up that edge, the highlights are in here. So we've given some definition to the overall form, created some volume by establishing a highlight more in the center of the form, letting it fade off a little bit here in the highlight. Get rid of that little light mark there. I think what I need to do is I'm gonna focus on this eye here. So I've got that black paper, but having this black charcoal on top adds another degree of depth. It expands that value range a little bit more. And in that way, the black of the paper actually starts to create its own tone. It starts to feel like reflected light. One of the cool things about value is that it's all relative. These kind of sharp scoops here that create that perspective over the eye socket. And then a little bit of definition here. I think at what time is it? Ooh, it's almost 3 o'clock. I've been with you guys for almost 2 hours. That has not felt like it's been that long. Time flies when you're having fun. So at this stage, it's really just being selective about certain areas. Where do I want to refine it so I can maintain that atmosphere of the light? It doesn't look like the reference. You know, the reference image captures this elephant on this nice bright day. There's, you know, a clear light source, and here what I've drawn is something a little different. So it's really deviated from the quality of light that the reference image captures, but I like that, and I think I'm just going to go with it. So I'm just going to kind of let my intuition guide things a little bit, which gets a little scary because my intuition has not always been the best, but you got to let it exercise sometimes. So I'm going to do that here. So what I'm doing is, as I kind of scan the drawing, I'm just trying to feel, you know, where is my eye drawn? Where does it feel incomplete? Where does it feel like an opportunity to contribute to the form? And just kind of poking around. I think right in here, I want to emphasize this. I don't know, there's something about these two lines there that I find really interesting. You know, I think because in some way it kind of reflects the shape of the tusks there. And I just like that positive and negative space. I think what I want to do is kind of refine the top edge just a little bit more. So right in here, where the top of the head comes into shadow, I'll sharpen up with the charcoal. There we go, just a little bit. I don't want to complete that whole bridge. Just a little bit of definition can sometimes be enough. So, it's been a lot of fun. So it might be, I might kind of sit with this for a little bit, come back to it a little bit later. Ooh, I like that. Like right in here is a little bit of light that creates that sense of form there. And right in here. And yeah, I think I want to get some of these folds here, so I'm trying to see the shape of the light as it catches on here and let the spaces in between kind of suggest the folds first, and then then I'll go back and kind of erase out the kind of the darker spots in the folds. And then hopefully that's sufficient in terms of a value contrast. But if not, I can always come back in with the charcoal to lift off a little bit more. A little bit of reflected light in here. So as I'm working in this area here, I want to be mindful that I don't want a heavy mark, because I don't want the reflected, the bounce light in this side compete. Don't want it to compete with the highlights over here. So I'm going to actually minimize that a little bit, just kind of suggest some of these creases. Maybe pull out the form in just a few small areas right in here to capture that brow. It kind of feels flat now to me, so I see that there's this kind of rectangular form where you have a highlight on this side, flattens out a little bit, and then it catches a subtle ridge right in here. Yeah, I like that. Oh, Jackie, I'm glad that you enjoyed working on this toned paper. I don't know what's happening for next week, what medium I'll be using. So check that out. Keep posted on artistnetwork.com or look for it here on our YouTube channel. Again, if you're just joining us, what you're watching is Drawing Together with Artist Network. My name's Scott Maier. We've been doing this for a while, about a year and a half now. We've been drawing together, slowly figuring things out. But I feel like I've developed some skills that were lacking prior to this, because I had focused on painting so much that I realized that I was just inhibited by a plateauing of my drawing skills. And so we select images every week to help us kind of push those. It's just about practice, and then you just keep at it, see if it unlocks something that we want to explore further in other areas of our work. I think I want to knock this down a little bit. That bounce light's a little too strong. There we go. But I think it's about where I think I want this drawing to be. What I want to do is evaluate this kind of abstractly. Just the rhythm of the marks, the relationship between the lights and the darks, the composition as a whole, the sense of movement and energy or light and shadow, purely on an abstract level. And then evaluate it in terms of the elephant. Now, I haven't seen very many elephants in life. It's been a long time since I've been to the zoo. And I've never been to a place where elephants roam the wild. So I don't really have that experience that I can pull from to see does this work actually create some sort of reflection of a real life encounter. It doesn't. So this is something different now. I now want to evaluate it on those merits. And I think it's working out okay. But I think I want to try something. I think there is something that's bothering me about this section here. It's, we really kind of have it anchored on this vertical stripe that is very weak. So I want to see what happens if I just create a little bit of texture in here that in some way reflects something in the reference photo, that it becomes an indicator to the viewer that there's something solid back there, but I don't want to lose that sense of light. That's the thing that was really interesting at first, and I have to be willing to sacrifice some of those things to try to push it a little bit farther, because I really feel like the only way I'm going to grow and get beyond certain plateaus is if I risk some of the things that I think are working to try to actually make it better, right? So, and if it doesn't work, I'll just take the whole thing out, start that whole section over again. If I don't like those marks, I can just soften it, right? So I need to be willing to kind of just play around in an abstract way to see, well, what do these marks contribute to the drawing? And in a subtle way, it just starts to give a little bit more substance to that area. I can start to suggest the contrast here, like I can suggest some of the creases in the body of the elephant, and even though it's again very subtle, in my mind it helps to create a transition as we move through the light, as the elephant moves from kind of sharp focus into this this kind of soft light, and maybe it suggests that there's a turn to the body of the elephant, so that what we're looking at here is not more of the body, but the body actually kind of extends off to the left. And then that starts to unlock some ideas here. I mean, what would happen if I did this? Again, just to break that up and suggest maybe light in that background. And actually see what happens if I were to drop something like this. Do we see that as a continuation? I don't know. I'm just playing. See if it works, see if it doesn't. But I don't know, I feel like there can be benefit to feeling like you're risking the whole drawing, or this part that I started to feel a little precious about this. And I think I've learned over the years that can be a scary thing, is when there's a part that you're drawing that becomes too precious that you're not willing to risk it to improve the drawing. I like that. Okay, I think I needed some brightness here, a form that helped to create a visual dialogue across here. So there's this kind of X formation. All right, so I think that this is what's standing out right now. There's that negative space that, on this side, I feel like it works to help create that form. It brings the tusk forward. On this side, I'm losing that. I need a little bit more variety. What it's doing is it's creating this dark halo around the contour here that I need to break up. I want to create a more interesting shape there. Because again, it starts to feel like there was like an even distance of darkness around that light form. I need to break that up to create more of that visual separation, to push that ear back a little bit more. Hopefully that makes sense when I'm talking about visual separation. Is that landing with everybody? Does it resonate? I don't know. I might be overthinking. I do that a lot in my work, and I suspect there are many of you that do as well. Overthinking, but I don't know. That's what's also fun about it. So again, I'm just trying to break up that shape so it doesn't feel like a distracting black halo. And that's one of those things that I happen to catch now, but I most likely, like in most of my other drawings, what happens is I set them aside. We finish our live stream. I set them aside and then I'm like, oh, I should have done this. Darn it, I missed something. And some of you have done a great job of gently encouraging me to look at some of those areas before it's finished. And there we go. Yeah, sometimes it's just these little things that can make a drawing come together. So just these subtle folds in the ear over here, for example. Yes, there's a question, is this going to be saved? Yes, so shortly after this live stream ends, it's going to show up as a recording. It takes a little while for the live chat, so if you are kind of inclined to go back through and look at the chat, see what questions were asked, sometimes it takes a little while for YouTube to kind of store all that and then reveal it on the recording. So when it goes live as a recording, you may only see the video for a little while, but if you want to look at the chat, it will show up at some point. That's my hope, at least. I think what I want to do is just play here with this. Sometimes it's just a little bit. It can make a big difference. There we go. Yeah, now I can see the remains of that dark halo to some degree, but it doesn't feel as overwhelming as it did before. So I'm just looking at breaking up some of these forms in other areas as well. All right. All right, Carolyn, thank you. Tammy, I'm glad there is more than one of me overthinks, one of us that overthinks like I do. So, but I don't know, like I said, I just learned to embrace that and enjoy that as part of the process. All right, so I want to thank you all for joining me. I'm going to hang out for a little bit to see if there's any lingering questions. There's a little bit of a delay, and so I'll hang out, but feel free to type any remaining questions here. I'll try to answer them. Again, this is Drawing Together. My name's Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artist Network. So check out artistnetwork.com. You can find a link in the description below to the show page. So if you've been following along or if you plan to draw along later, and if you have even if you have a completely different interpretation, you want to use different materials, a totally different elephant image, go for it. I'd love to see your work. So you'll find a link to the show page there where you can share your work. You can find a link to the reference image as well. Look at the playlist where you can find all of the other over 100 episodes, each episode a different subject. I kind of pick and choose which ones you prefer to work with, because this is, it's not a class. There's no real curriculum. We just get together to draw and we try to encourage one another and get better. Let's see. Oh, Robert. Greetings. The background did not need accents, so I would definitely keep it very soft with moderate light. All right. Thank you for that feedback. So I welcome any observations and feedbacks, and that's what this show is about. So yeah, I think I'm gonna generally just leave it as it is. I don't know if I'm gonna add a whole lot more. I'm happy with the way it turned out. I may not be happy with it in an hour. That's the nature of art making. So, phew, this has been a fun one. I'm so glad I got to be here live, because again, we couldn't be here live last week. But I'll be back live next week. Keep an eye out for the next episode. I'll have those posted soon. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit the what is it, a bell? I think is I should know this, having done these live shows for over a year now. But there's some way that you can set notifications for the next one when it's posted, so you can join us. So. All right, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm gonna sign off. It was great seeing some new names and all those familiar names. I can't thank you enough for joining this community and making it so awesome. All right, all right, Jackie, I'll stop. I see your comment.